Hi, this is Annette with a quick description of the main processes that take place within a conservation organisation, aiming to illustrate how information from conservation projects is pretty important for the smooth running of all of these processes. I'll base this model on the open standards for the practice of conservation. That's an adaptive management process developed by the Conservation Measures Partnership, which is a large collaboration of conservation NGOs. The Open Standards outlines the 5 key steps for planning and implementing conservation projects and for continually adapting those projects based on the results being achieved relative to those expected. To get the process, I'll flatten out the loop and use a concept called a Swimlane Diagram to illustrate the flows. Swimlane diagrams are a tool used in software development. It helps to show the actions that take place within a process and the actions that are taking place elsewhere in other processes and how all those interact. So starting with the conservation process, projects start out in open standard speak in a design phase where they're defining what the project's trying to achieve, basically, before moving on to developing a plan which shows how they're going to go about trying to achieve those aims. It then moves on into the implement stage, doing the work of the project, analysing the results that are being achieved relative to what the expectations were in the plan, and then ultimately working out how to analyse all of that information and adapt the project based on the results being achieved, and going back around that loop several times, and then periodically coming out and recording the lessons that are being learnt so that they can be shared with other practitioners. So that's a simple view of an adaptive management process within conservation. If we look at another core process in the organisation, which is fundraising or finding the funding to allow these projects to occur, people working in these areas, their constant work is around building donor relationships, finding new donors, communicating with existing donors, letting them know how the work of the organisation is progressing. As conservation projects come along, at some point during the early phases, the design or the planning phases, there's conversations around what that project is trying to do and the funding that it needs. And the folks in the fundraising swim lane, if you like, they need access to quality, consistent and clear project information about not just what the project's trying to do, but why it's trying to do that, and how they're going to go about doing their work, how they're going to measure their progress and results, and defining ultimately what impact they're trying to have. So then the fundraisers can use that information to match what the project needs with the interests of donors, and communicate to donors about why this might be a good investment. Ultimately, that leads to funding being received for the project, which feeds into the conservation project and allows the implementation to keep running. The fundraisers also need periodically this information coming back out of the conservation process about how the project is progressing, so that they can feed that information back to the people funding the project and letting donors know just how that work is going. And that's a critical feedback loop so that they can maintain donor relationships, keeping donors informed of what's happening, talking about all the good work that the organisation's doing. Without that information flow, that whole feedback loop starts to break down. Mapping in another process, which is around financial management. The core work of people in this area is around planning the organisation's finances for the short, near and long term. To do that, they need to know information about what the project is trying to do and why, the same sort of information that the fundraisers need, so that they can look at the investment options, comparing the investment required to the benefits expected, and then weave that into all the other funding needs of the organisation and start to manage that financial planning. And then based on that analysis, they invest in the project. They either resource it with existing funds from the organisation, or as funding is coming in from new donors. They also need good information coming out of the conservation project about how the project is progressing, looking at how the spending is going, actual versus budget, the reforecast of any budgets that the project needs. and that provides a feedback loop through into the ongoing investment in the project and the broader financial planning of the organisation, just knowing what's needing, what's changing within the projects, and how that fits within the overall organisation's finances. So they've got a pretty critical dependence on this information coming out of the progress reporting of the conservation projects. The fourth part of the puzzle is the people management process. The folks working in this area, they're all about making sure the organisation has the resourcing that it needs to do all of the things that the organisation is trying to do, and putting in place the processes and the policies around managing people, managing the resourcing. At different times they need information about what projects they're trying to do, so that they can match the skills, the capabilities, the competencies required of a project with what's available within the organisation, and over time planning for additional resourcing within the organisation around making sure that the right skills and capabilities are in place. They also need to know what those resources are going to do. What are the objectives of the project? What are the roles performing within that project? And then as the project is progressing, they need some information coming out of the project about it. Is it achieving its objectives? Is it producing the results expected? Because that then helps with the review of the performance of teams and individuals, and to recognise that performance as well. And that provides the feedback loop around what resourcing does the organisation require in the near and long term, and how is all that progressing. So hopefully that illustrates how this reporting out of the conservation projects is pretty critical for all the other processes within an organisation in order for them to run efficiently. In theory, this can all be done through systems. The information should be systematised, should be available to people. In practice, a lot of that doesn't occur, but it occurs because people make it happen. There's a lot of manual work around passing information between people, re-entering information into different systems, just making it work in one way or another. More efficient by putting the computers to work. So, for example, in the fundraising system, in the fundraising process, they're generally pretty well supported by a donor management system. The finance folks have usually fairly sophisticated finance systems. The HR folks sometimes have good systems, sometimes a lot of their work has to be just managed manually or within spreadsheets and the like. These systems work quite well within their swim lanes, within the process that they're designed to do, but often there's not a lot of interaction between them, partly because in the past there's not been good conservation systems to provide this information. But now through the open standards and its supporting tools, Marathi and Marathi Share, a lot of this information can be systematised, can be made available, and can flow more easily off to these other systems, either directly through the systems or by people in those processes, those swim lanes, having access into these systems. So that's a brief description of the business processes within a theoretical conservation organisation. It's simplified some pretty complex processes just to try and highlight the interactions. Hopefully it's helped you to see that it's important for all parts of the organisation to have easy access to high quality and up-to-date information about conservation projects at the outset when they're being planned, but then in an ongoing sense as they're running, as they're reporting progress, as they're updating their plans. And also that information needs to be in systems if all this is to run smoothly and efficiently. All organisations struggle with a lack of resources, so efficiency improvements like this are really important if we're to make the best use of the limited resources available to us.